All right, the Subcommittee on Energy will come to order. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare recess of the Subcommittee at any time. Per agreement between the Chairman and Ranking Member of the full committee, I ask unanimous consent that Mr. Beyer of Virginia be allowed to participate in today's hearing. Without objection, welcome Mr. Beyer. Welcome to today's hearing entitled From Theory to Reality, the Limitless Potential of Fusion Energy. Move to opening statements. I recognize myself for 5 minutes. Good afternoon. Today, the Energy Subcommittee will be examining the development of fusion energy as it progresses from scientific experiment to commercial reality. Our conversation will cover the Department of Energy's Fusion Energy Sciences program, as well as the federal government's public-private partnerships with the commercial fusion industry. Fusion is the energy of our sun and the energy of every star in the universe. It has long been the dream of mankind to capture this unlimited, clean source of energy to power our world. Given its potential, the Department of Energy has invested billions of taxpayer dollars in fundamental research and development through the Fusion Energy Sciences program. Today, fusion is more than just a science experiment. Commercial fusion is an engineering challenge similar to putting a man on the moon. It's an economic opportunity even greater than the California gold rush of 1849. And it's a legislative opportunity more consequential to our nation, as was the Louisiana Purchase or the Marshall Plan. I would like to introduce the topic and focus of today's hearing in a very personal way. I want to tell you of my own journey from being a fusion skeptic just a few months ago to a fusion optimist today. Many of humankind's greatest inventions are inspired by what we observe in creation. The sun tells us that fusion is real, for example. Birds testify to the possibility of flight. Lightning reveals the power and potential of electricity. But consider this, in none of these instances do our modern solutions mimic the exact same mechanics of nature. Modern aircraft do not flap their wings. Lightning does not power our cities. It was up to the Wright brothers, Michael Faraday, Thomas Edison, Marie Curie, and many others to bridge the scientific discovery into the extraordinary modern world we live in today. Fusion research, funded by our federal government, and much of it through this subcommittee, has focused on understanding and recreating the fusion environment of the sun. What if humankind's harnessing of fusion power did not require recreating the sun here on Earth? What if commercial fusion was achieved through rapid, iterative innovation and the entrepreneurial spirit, like the Wright brothers in their bicycle shop? The large-scale, government-funded fusion experiments like ITER or the National Ignition Lab have unlocked invaluable secrets about the nature of fusion, plasma physics, superconducting materials, and much else. But the commercialization of fusion energy into reliable, affordable, and responsible electricity on the grid will be an entrepreneurial solution, aligning scientific, engineering, environmental, and economic interests. As I have met with and evaluated the technology of private fusion companies over the last several months, I have become much more hopeful that fusion on the grid may be possible before the end of the decade. The incredible American spirit of commercial innovation is making progress at far greater speed and with far fewer resources than government projects. And I'm convinced that this nation must dramatically increase our public investment in these private efforts to ensure that we are the first to harness the history-changing energy source. Over the last 5 years, Congress has prioritized funding for fusion energy science and has enacted comprehensive reauthorizations of DOE's programs, including the 2018 Department of Energy Research and Innovation Act, the Energy Act of 2020, and most recently the CHIPS and Science Act. These strategic investments, along with the development of new public-private partnerships, has helped foster a growing commercial fusion industry in the United States. Private investment has grown to $2.8 billion last year, with 23 of the 37 private fusion companies located here in the United States. According to the Fusion Industry Association, in 2015, ARPA-E launched the ALPHA program to help find low-cost pathways to fusion with alternative approaches and has funded over $120 million in fusion projects, including partnering with one of our witnesses today, Dr. David Kirtley. Just last month, the Department of Energy selected 8 companies to participate in its new $46 million fusion milestone-based development program. This program is modeled on the highly successful NASA program, Commercial Orbital Transportation Services, which spurred the development of our space sector. This program is exactly what Congress can do and must do to ensure that the nascent fusion industry continues to flourish. It is critical for Congress to continue to provide robust funding for fundamental research and fusion and to fund essential public-private partnerships. As the Energy Subcommittee Chairman, I wanted to share with you my own journey from skepticism to optimism, and I will work tirelessly with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to bring U.S. fusion forward from fundamental research to fusion on the grid. I want to thank our witnesses for their testimony today, and I look forward to our conversation. I now recognize the ranking member, the gentleman from New York, for his opening statement. Sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for convening this hearing here today, and thank you to our panel of distinguished witnesses for appearing before the committee to talk about a subject that is not only fascinating, but also hopefully very significant for our clean energy future. Fusion energy is a topic that I personally have loved delving into since joining the Science Committee, and I know that many of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle share my enthusiasm. It is no surprise why this clean energy source is attractive. The material used as fuel is practically infinitely abundant. It is safe and it is clean. It does not produce greenhouse gas emissions or other forms of pollution, so fusion energy would be a real game changer for humanity. While we still have a lot of catching up to do in other aspects of climate action, the federal government has recognized the great potential fusion energy holds. Congress, through the acts of this committee, has authorized sweeping federal policy for fusion energy research and development in the handful of historic climate and energy bills passed into law over the past few years. And a few of those bills, along with annual appropriations, have provided significant funding for these activities. I am pleased to see that President Biden's budget request for fiscal year 2024 asks for funding very close to the authorization of appropriations provided in one of these bills, the Science Committee's landmark CHIPS and Science Act. All of these actions display broad support for fusion energy from the federal government, and we are seeing the fruits of our labor. There have been huge developments in the field over the past few years, which are bringing us closer to realizing the full potential of fusion energy. There have been advances in engineering and system performance, as well as the achievement of a burning plasma and fusion ignition. There has also been a flurry of private investment in fusion energy technology, and I know some of our witnesses here today can attest to that. But as we all know all too well, the impacts of climate change are devastating, and we must continue ramping up our ambition levels. Those of us from districts in the Northeast, such as mine, and even those of us here in D.C., all experienced the smoke from the Canadian wildfires just last week. Everyone felt the effects, from workers who had no choice but to continue working outside, to commuters, to children who could not play outside for recess. And this incident is not unique or isolated. The climate crisis is far-reaching, and it is an existential matter for all of us. So I will continue to advocate for robust funding for fusion energy and for the many other clean energy solutions that can be deployed today in order to protect our health, safety, and future. I urge my colleagues to do the same. I look forward to this discussion, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Bowman. We're pleased to be joined by the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Lucas. Sir, I now recognize you for your opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Williams. Today we have an opportunity to explore the current status of U.S. research and development in fusion energy sciences, a cutting-edge technology that holds great promise for our energy independence, global competitiveness, and environmental stewardship. As many of today's panelists know, fusion R&D has long enjoyed bipartisan support on this committee, and for good reason. It is exactly the type of high-risk, high-reward research that expands our fundamental knowledge of science and technology and pushes the limits of what's possible. The potential benefits of this fundamental research are tremendous, which is why it's so critical for DOE to prioritize it. That's why Chairman Williams and I, along with majority members of this subcommittee, sent a letter to the Secretary recently to ensure the Office of Science funds programs like Fusion Energy Sciences are appropriately supported. Fusion is the ultimate clean and abundant energy source. If we are serious about our energy future, there is no technology that meets our needs better than fusion. Today, I look forward to hearing more about how the Science Committee can continue our support for this high-priority research activities both internationally and here at home. Since our last meeting on this subject in 2021, the U.S. fusion community has been hard at work. You've been busy. As a result of that work, we've seen several landmark accomplishments, like the achievement of fusion ignition at the Lawrence Livermore National Lab. There has been a surge of innovation in the U.S. fusion industry, including a first-of-its-kind fusion power purchase agreement and a favorable Nuclear Regulatory Commission ruling on the regulation of U.S. fusion reactors, just to name a few. Last summer, Congress passed the CHIPS and Science Act of 2022, which, thanks to years of bipartisan Science Committee work, provides robust funding, essentially policy direction, and strategic guidance for the U.S. fusion energy R&D. This legislation gives the DOE Office of Science, our national labs, and their industry research partners the resources they need to continue to excel. This is important because despite many recent advances in the field, fusion energy science remains one of the greatest challenges in experimental physics today. We know there's much more work to be done to realize the promise of this emerging technology, and we cannot afford to lose the momentum that has been generated so far. To do this, we need to continue to take an all-of-the-above approach to advancing our shared fusion energy goals. We must support full funding for U.S. participation in ITER, the leading international research project for fusion energy. We must make major investments in U.S. fusion research programs and infrastructure, and we must continue to support productive partnerships with the rapidly growing U.S. fusion energy industry. In the immediate future, we'll be continuing our oversight of DOE's implementation of Science Committee direction in CHIPS and Science and the Energy Act of 2020. While I was pleased to see the President's budget request includes funding levels for some fusion energy science activities consistent with CHIPS and Science authorizations, I look forward to hearing DOE's plans to fully implement this legislation. And I want to thank our witnesses for their testimony today and for outlining their plans to make fusion energy a reality for the next generation. I look forward to a productive discussion. I thank you, Chairman Williams, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I now recognize Ms. Lofgren, the ranking member of the full committee, for an opening statement.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the ranking member for this very important hearing, and to each of the witnesses. This is an impressive panel, and I thank you for being here with us today. You know, this committee, as has been mentioned, has played a leading role in building support and shaping national policy for fusion energy development, especially over the last several years. Now, the need to significantly improve support for U.S. fusion research is actually one of the reasons why I ran for Congress in 1994, and it's one of the major reasons why I decided to seek the ranking member position on this committee after the retirement of Chairwoman Johnson last year. The support for fusion is strongly bipartisan, and it's also bicameral. Now, the substantial direction for modern fusion energy programs was provided in the bipartisan Department of Energy Research and Innovation Act of 2018 and expanded upon in the Bipartisan Energy Act of 2020, and as has been mentioned, in the CHIPS and Science Act that we were able to pass in the last Congress. I'm excited about the breakthroughs that we have seen in the last 2 years, including the achievement of ignition at the National Ignition Facility right in my backyard in December, and it's worth noting that Congress always stood up for the National Ignition Facility and saved it from the brink of extinction several times, so we were especially pleased to see that achievement. I'm glad that President Biden has recognized the progress we've made in his budget request for 2024, which includes over $1 billion for the Department of Energy's Fusion Energy Research Program. That's a 32% increase. Now, the request isn't perfect. I advocated for more. For example, it still does not include any specific funds to establish an alternative fusion energy concepts program that was authorized in 2018, and no president has asked for the funds yet. But taken as a whole, this budget request is a huge improvement over previous budget requests made by any president, whatever their party. We're now seeing in the race to commercial fusion mind-boggling advances, so has stated so clearly in the recent long-range plan developed by DOE's Fusion Energy Science Advisory Committee. Now is the time to move aggressively towards the deployment of fusion energy, or to put it another way, if not now, when? So I want to give my apologies in advance because our hearing was disrupted by votes. It wasn't our fault. First, thank you for your patience in waiting for us to return, not only the witnesses but the audience. But I also have a speaking engagement a little after 3, so I'm going to have to leave. But I read the testimony of each one of you last night, and it's excellent. So I look forward to hearing the questions. The staff will fill me in. And thank you for all you've done, but even more, what you're going to do with your investors, with your scientists, and with the support of this committee. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. So let me introduce our witnesses. Our first witness today is Dr. Catherine McCarthy, the Director of the U.S. ITER Project Office. Our next witness is Dr. David Kirtley, the CEO of Helion Energy. Third is Dr. Wayne Solomon, Vice President of the Magnetic Fusion Energy at General Atomics. Our next witness is Mr. Andrew Holland, CEO of the Fusion Industry Association. And our last witness is Dr. Scott Sue, Senior Advisor and Lead Fusion Coordinator at the U.S. Department of Energy. I now recognize Dr. McCarthy for 5 minutes to present her testimony.
Thank you very much. Chairman Williams, Chairman Lucas, Ranking Member Bowman, and Ranking Member Lofgren, and members of the committee, I want to thank you for this opportunity to discuss fusion and the ITER project. I'm Dr. Kathy McCarthy, Director of the U.S. ITER project at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. I'm a nuclear engineer and National Academy of Engineering member with over 30 years in the fields of fusion and fission, nuclear science, and engineering. The path to fusion energy has benefited from several recent record-breaking achievements, both here in the United States at the National Ignition Facility, as well as at the JET tokamak in the United Kingdom. However, there remain major challenges that must be resolved to develop practical fusion energy. ITER is positioned to play a central role in addressing these challenges. For a practical fusion energy system, we must be able to produce and sustain a fusion power source in a safe and economical manner. At full power operation, ITER will produce a self-sustaining, what we call burning plasma, and demonstrate commercial scale power over a long pulse lasting several minutes. The data, experience, and lessons learned from ITER will be valuable to a broad range of fusion approaches. As a research facility, ITER will offer tools and expertise at the scale of a specialized Department of Energy laboratory and will be a valuable test facility. For a path to fusion energy, not just fusion science, it will be essential to master both the science and technology required. ITER offers that opportunity, plus access to ITER intellectual property, and to a one-of-a-kind scientific facility for research on high-power plasmas. ITER's already providing us with practical experience designing, fabricating, and assembling a licensed fusion facility. ITER's developing fusion supply chains and working with industry to deliver to fusion's exacting requirements. ITER's building a diverse fusion workforce and is one of the largest training grounds for fusion in the world. ITER is providing information and experience to member nations. Information of particular interest to U.S. fusion industry includes plasma heating systems, plasma fueling, vacuum systems, superconducting magnet technology, and manufacturing qualification approaches. DOE is leading a process to facilitate U.S. fusion access to project information and intellectual property. ITER is a major contributor to U.S. competitiveness in fusion now and in the future. The U.S. has the advantage of participation in ITER, plus a strong public program in fusion science and engineering, and an expanding fusion industry. The start of ITER tokamak assembly in 2020 and continued project progress shows us that it's possible to achieve engineering precision at the millimeter scale on large fusion components. Today, the international site is more than 85% complete for civil construction, and hardware components are being delivered for assembly from all of the ITER partners. There have been changes and challenges at the International ITER project. After the passing of Bernard Bigot, Pietro Baraboschi assumed the Director General role in October of 2022. Baraboschi is now leading organizational adjustments to the project to support success with tokamak assembly and to ensure appropriate integration with ITER partners. There have also been technical challenges. The project identified nonconformances in some vacuum vessel sectors that will require repair before assembly. The project also determined that manufacturing methods resulted in defects on thermal shield components. Both of these issues are being addressed. The ITER organization is working closely with the French nuclear regulator to determine an appropriate path for regulation. The project is a strong advocate of a stepwise approach, since while ITER poses fewer hazards than a typical fission reactor, it is a new technology. Finally, the ITER organization is also engaged in preparation of an updated baseline and schedule to address delays from COVID and first-of-a-kind manufacturing and assembly. U.S. ITER is also engaged in updating its baseline and schedule. Recent U.S. ITER achievements include the delivery of 2 central solenoid modules with a third on the way for what's called the heart of ITER, a 60-foot-tall superconducting magnet at the center of the tokamak. Since its original baseline in 2017, U.S. ITER has completed over 100 deliveries to the ITER site. Overall, 60% of all U.S. assigned in-kind hardware contributions have been credited by ITER. We're at an exciting moment in the path to practical fusion energy. The ITER project is complementary to other government fusion investments and to efforts in private industry. We appreciate the support of the House and this committee and all that they've provided to ITER and fusion. Thank you for this opportunity to share my thoughts with the subcommittee, and I request that my written testimony be made part of the public record, and I welcome any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. McCarthy. I now recognize Dr. Kirtley for 5 minutes to present his testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, honorable members of the committee. My name is Dr. David Kirtley. I'm a co-founder and the CEO of Helion Energy. I'm honored to be here today to speak on behalf of Helion, provide evidence for the accelerating progress of the commercial fusion energy sector. Moreover, I'm humbled to be here along my esteemed peers, for whom I respect, and for their contributions they have and have continued to bring to the fusion community. Candidly, 20 years ago, I would not have imagined to be here to speak on the viability of commercializing fusion technology. I was, like many, a fusion skeptic. In fact, after many years of studying fusion, I actually left the field for a while and went to work in the aerospace sector building plasma thrusters because I did not see a clear path forward for commercializing fusion energy technology in my lifetime. The last time I was in this building was actually on behalf of Plasma Thruster Technologies. But I am now here, 10 years since Helion's funding, with a commitment to deploy megawatts of fusion power on the grid by the end of this decade. We partnered with industry giants Microsoft and Constellation, and a now growing team of over 165 employees who are deeply inspired by our mission to enable a future of humanity with clean, widespread electricity. It's fair to say that I see the outlook for commercial fusion and the entire planet much more optimistically than I once did. Now I believe fusion will be on the grid within a decade, and we have the potential to build a fusion power plant per day if we plan our policies right. Today, I hope to leave you with that same belief. In the last 2 decades, several things have happened to change not only my outlook, but the outlook of many in the fusion community. Scientists have been studying fusion since the 1950s, but it's not until the last 2 decades that many of our theories have been made possible by progress in outside industries, such as power electronics, fiber optics, and computer simulation. This, paired with a growing swell of physicists and engineers and companies approaching the fusion challenge from varying perspectives, has helped the tens of private fusion companies in the US, and even more globally, achieve remarkable results. In the last 5 years alone, my industry peers have increased the fusion output of their machines, demonstrated new magnetic technologies, and developed advanced computational models that bring us all closer to realizing the commercial fusion vision. I'm extremely proud that Helion has also been a part of that progress. To date, we built 6 working fusion prototypes, each building on the successes and the failures of its predecessor. Our earliest prototypes were supported by research grants and SBIR grants from the Department of Energy Office of Science, setting records for temperature of private fusion systems. Also notably, the ARPA-E program, ARPA-E Alpha program specifically supported our 5th fusion prototype, which clearly demonstrated thermonuclear fusion. In 2022, our 6th generation fusion prototype, we call that one Trenta, was the first private fusion system to reach 100 million degree fusion plasma temperatures, demonstrating there's a path to bringing Helion's approach to fusion to the grid. And now we're building our 7th generation system. We switched naming topologies and call that one Polaris, which we expect to demonstrate the demonstration of electricity from fusion for the first time. Following Polaris, Helion will then work to build our first fusion power plant. If everything is successful, we'll be slated to deliver electricity to Microsoft as soon as 2028. So while I'm incredibly proud of the progress my team has made over the last 10 years, I know we still have a tremendous amount of work to do, as I'm sure is true across the fusion industry. I believe in the power of human ingenuity, and I believe that we are now at a point where we can meet the physics and engineering challenges our field has worked so long and so hard to overcome. And I am convinced that this will happen this decade. But the fusion community cannot do it alone. We need the bold leadership and continued support from the US government while evolving our thinking around fusion deployment and policy. I call on this committee to help realize a vision beyond the construction of a single power plant, but an entire American fusion manufacturing industry that can get to constructing a power plant per day in the 2030s. To do that, we need to begin considering the next step for fusion and not just ask, how can we further the fusion science, but also ask, how can America accelerate fusion's development and lead the world in its mass deployment? A great example of this thinking came from the NRC, which with its recent determination to find a clear path for fusion regulation in the United States. Next, I see an opportunity for Congress to implement a three-part policy to support manufacturing, licensing, and then deployment of fusion at scale, which I look forward to discuss more with you over the course of this hearing today. In front of us is an enormous opportunity to change the world for the better. We are finally at an inflection point where the science and engineering can deliver on fusion's long-held promise before the end of the decade. I hope the government will continue to offer its support for the industry as we scale up mass manufacturing and deployment. I want to thank all of you today for allowing me to be here and provide input on how I believe we can do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kirtley. I now recognize Dr. Solomon for 5 minutes, sir, for your opening statement.
Thank you. Chairman Williams, Ranking Member Bowman, Chairman Lucas, Ranking Member Lofgren, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me here today to speak before you. My name is Wayne Solomon, and I'm the Vice President of the Magnetic Fusion Energy Division at General Atomics, and I'm excited to join you today to share with you my optimism and excitement about fusion energy. GA, as you may know, has a rich fusion legacy dating back to 1955 when we began our pioneering innovations in atomic energy research. Now with over 12,500 employees and extensive global facilities, we're committed to driving fusion forward. Our expertise is evident in several key programs. We proudly operate the D3D National Fusion Facility, the largest tokamak in the US, on behalf of the Department of Energy's Office of Science. This facility is a vital resource for the entire fusion community, serving over 650 researchers from nearly 100 institutes from the US and around the world. It has been continuously upgraded to stay at the forefront of fusion research and provides hands-on experience for over 200 students and postdoctoral scholars. GA also has a team of dedicated team exploring fusion theory and computational science. They use powerful supercomputers like the Frontier system at Oak Ridge National Laboratory to gain insights into complex fusion dynamics. GA also plays a major role in the US ITER project, responsible for building the ITER central solenoid, the world's most powerful superconducting magnet pulse. This magnet can generate enough force to lift an aircraft carrier out of the water. As you heard from Dr. McCarthy a few moments ago, we have already shipped the first 3 of those completed modules from our facility, with the remaining 4 of them well underway in fabrication and undergoing final testing at our San Diego facility. GA is also an important contributor of other ITER systems, including control systems and measurement systems that will be critical to support ITER's operation. In addition, GA supports research in inertial confinement fusion, which, as you heard earlier, achieved the first controlled ignition at the National Ignition Facility last year, funded through the Weapons Stockpile Stewardship Program of the NNSA. GA's innovative technologies were key in this achievement, including the production of the tiny target capsules and the fill tubes used to fill the capsules with fuel. Through a 25-year collaboration with the ICF program, GA actually supplies more than 12,000 components annually. Internally, GA has invested over $100 million in magnetic fusion research and development, focusing on advancements in magnets, materials, detectors, and control systems, and other supporting technologies for fusion. We have introduced our vision for a pilot plant based on the advanced tokamak concept, enabling continuous steady-state operation, which we continue to pursue. Our collaborations with national labs like Oak Ridge, Princeton, and Lawrence Livermore have been crucial to our progress. From the nanoscale to the macro scale, GA recognizes the importance of public-private partnerships and fully supports the DOE Milestone Program and funding for startup companies to pursue commercial fusion. We also recognize the crucial role of the public program in getting fusion to where it is now, and believe it will be even more essential to robustly fund public programs and facilities into the future. I want to express my gratitude to the committee for its leadership in advancing fusion. The President's FY24 budget request of over $1 billion reflects your hard work and insight. However, achieving the goals of the bold decadal vision will require even greater and sustained investments. In conclusion, I would like to emphasize 3 key points. First, GA brings unique combination of public and private sector experience in both magnetic fusion energy and inertial fusion energy. Second, private sector efforts can significantly accelerate progress towards the success of commercial fusion and the decadal vision. And third, the public programs supporting national labs, academia, and existing established facilities like D3D is vital for the future success of fusion. I thank you for the opportunity to testify. Mr. Chairman, I also have 6 letters from prominent fusion researchers that I would appreciate you inserting into the record of this hearing. I commend this committee for its leadership in advancing fusion and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Your letters will be entered into the record. I now recognize Mr. Holland for 5 minutes to present his testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Williams. Ranking Member Bowman, Chairman Lucas, Ranking Member Lofgren, members of the committee, thank you all for the invitation to testify on fusion energy's limitless potential. I'm Andrew Holland, the CEO of the Fusion Industry Association. Our 37 member companies are dedicated to building the energy system of tomorrow on a timescale that's relevant to today's energy challenges. I'll refer you to my full statement in the record for all the details, but I'd like to give you an overview on why I'm so excited that business is getting serious about fusion. Unlike my colleagues on this panel, I'm not a scientist. Instead, my background is in public policy. I actually started my career answering phones for a member of Congress about 100 yards away, down that way. I turned my career towards supporting fusion energy because it's a clean energy solution that can scale. When fusion power plants are widely available, we'll be able to bring clean, safe, sustainable energy to areas of the country and the world that have been left behind. And the link between energy and national security has never been clearer, especially after Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. Fusion energy will mean that geography no longer matters for energy security. So it's clear why there's bipartisan interest in fusion energy. The Biden administration's bold decadal vision builds on the groundwork laid by the Trump administration's Department of Energy and the bipartisan leadership of this committee. So let me say thank you for working together over many years to support fusion research and development. The FIA's members include a wide variety of approaches to fusion power: magnets, lasers, pistons, or more that could drive fusion. That diversity manages risk. 37 shots on goal give us more chances of scoring than concentrating resources on just one approach. Our members include Helion Energy, whose CEO is testifying here with me, and 22 other American companies of the 37 companies in total. They range in size from hundreds of employees and billions of dollars in capital to startups with a few people, seed funding, and a good idea. And I want to give you some idea about our affiliate members, our 72 affiliate members, who include many of the companies who will be involved in the broader fusion energy economy. These range from small, specialized manufacturers like Keller Technology Company in upstate New York or Medox in Houston, to utilities like the Tennessee Valley Authority or Southern Company, who will be delivering energy from fusion power plants. Google, who needs a firm, secure, zero-carbon source of power for their vast energy demand, or firms like Westinghouse, Fluor, and Bechtel, who want to use their experience from other energy sources to support building a fusion-powered future. I could easily list other affiliate members ranging from NGOs to law firms to multinational oil companies. Because where fusion once was only a matter for publicly funded universities or national labs, it is rapidly becoming a part of key decisions in businesses around the world. Even in the 18 months since this committee last held a fusion hearing, investment has more than doubled to nearly $6 billion. So everyone in fusion knows the one question we always get next: when? Technological breakthroughs are a function of both time and resources. Today, the addition of private funding, commercial innovation, and new public-private partnerships put fusion on an accelerated pathway. FIA members agree that the timeline of a decadal vision can be achieved. And I know this is extremely ambitious, but we need ambition. While American firms have an early advantage in the private fusion landscape, other countries are moving forward their plans for commercial fusion, with Japan, South Korea, Germany, and especially the UK putting forward ambitious plans. As American allies and partners race towards fusion, China is also making key investments and hitting important milestones. China could win the race to fusion energy if the U.S. does not invest. So maybe the question is not when, but where. So what is to be done? A new milestone-based public-private partnership will accelerate fusion by using public dollars to drive private investment in a pay-for-performance program, leading to fusion pilot plants. The announcement 2 weeks ago of 8 new milestone-based awards to fusion energy companies is the latest step in a process this committee has long led towards. And this year, for the first time, the President's budget requested over $1 billion for fusion energy research, including new R&D centers and funding for the milestone program. This funding is an important start. We urge you to support the budget request. Let me close by saying that this is exactly how the United States works best. Public leadership on science and infrastructure paired with private capital and business innovation. In the decades to come, when they write the book on how fusion was commercialized, what role will Congress have played? The opportunity is there for us to seize it. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions. Great to be with you all today.
Thank you, Mr. Holland. I now recognize Dr. Su for 5 minutes to present his testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Williams, Ranking Member Bowman, Chairman Lucas, Ranking Member Lofgren, and distinguished members of the committee. It is an honor to appear before you today. The Department of Energy is grateful for your unwavering bipartisan support of fusion energy sciences R&D. As the DOE's lead fusion coordinator, I will speak to DOE's recent efforts to advance a bold decadal vision for commercial fusion energy. which was first unveiled at a White House summit in March 2022. This bold vision leverages both the decades of public investments that brought fusion science to breathtaking heights, such as the achievement of fusion ignition last December, and the significant private capital being invested into U.S. fusion companies. Our key objective is to partner with the private sector to resolve the largest remaining scientific and technological challenges this decade, with the ambition to realize an operating fusion pilot plant early in the next decade. If we are successful, fusion could contribute to achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2050 while enabling energy security, energy abundance, and strengthened U.S. technological leadership. Simultaneously, we will prepare the path to fusion commercialization by addressing a range of needs, including supporting the development of regulatory frameworks, building out supply chains, engaging the public to ensure an energy and environmental justice, development of a skilled and diverse workforce, and much more. The many recent fusion scientific and technological advances suggest that practical fusion energy may now be less a matter of time than that of collective societal will. In the remainder of my statement, I highlight key DOE efforts over the past year to advance the bold decadal vision. First, just 2 weeks ago, DOE announced 8 selectees under the milestone-based fusion development program, which was first authorized in the Energy Act of 2020 and reauthorized in the CHIPS and Science Act of 2022. This program is the primary mechanism by which DOE will partner with the private sector to accelerate fusion energy R&D. Modeled after the NASA program that enabled the commercial space launch industry, and guided by recommendations from the National Academy's report Bringing Fusion to the U.S. Grid, the Milestone Program is an innovative public-private partnership that allows for industry-friendly terms and conditions, while simultaneously reducing risk to the taxpayer because companies will provide more than half the total project costs via non-federal sources and will receive federal payments only upon verified milestone completion. The 8 recipients represent a diversified portfolio of fusion concepts and commercialization approaches, building on the full range of longstanding investments that the DOE has made, including from the Office of Science, the NNSA, and more recently, ARPA-E. The selectees will work with multiple DOE national labs, universities, and other stakeholders on the R&D toward realizing a preliminary engineering design for a fusion pilot plant. Second, the DOE formed a new fusion crosscut team to coordinate fusion-relevant equities across DOE program offices. Highlights of these activities include the Office of Science Isotope R&D Production Program led an assessment of fusion fuel isotope needs for fusion demonstration and deployment. The NNSA's Defense Nuclear Nonproliferation Office sponsored a workshop at Princeton University to start a discussion on how best to support fusion commercialization in a manner that addresses nuclear proliferation concerns. And the DOE Office of Economic Impact and Diversity helped implement the requirement of community benefit plans into the Milestone Program. Third, I'd like to mention elements that directly advance the bold decadal vision in the President's fiscal year 24 budget request. $130 million to grow the Milestone Program, $120 million for new fusion R&D centers to support and align national lab and university efforts in the development of a fusion pilot plant, $15 million for inertial fusion energy, and $14.7 million for studies on priority test facilities, such as a neutron source to advance fusion material science and testing. These efforts are in addition to ongoing R&D activities supported by the Office of Science, NNSA, and ARPA-E that provide the foundation and innovations for the bold decadal vision. Finally, the DOE is engaging with interagency and international partners to identify new targeted strategic collaborations to compress the timeline to fusion commercialization. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify. DOE looks forward to continued collaborations with all of you to deliver timely commercial fusion energy. I'll be happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chu. I want to thank all of you for your comments and insight. I think there's a lot of diversity and experience and points of view, so I think we'll have a good discussion. And I'd like to begin, I'm going to reserve my time for questions until later, but I'd like to recognize Chairman Lucas, for 5 minutes for questions, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I mentioned in my opening statement, I'm a strong advocate for an all-of-the-above approach, not just in energy in general, but specifically in fusion energy. It's not the government's role to pick winners and losers. So, Dr. McCarthy, with all the momentum that commercial fusion sector is experiencing right now, what would you say to some of ITER's critics that argue it is no longer relevant? Let's just cut to the chase.
Thank you for that question, Chairman Lucas. So let me start out by saying part of the reason why there is the large private investment is because of the path that ITER has paved in terms of designing, fabricating, delivering, and now assembling components. That's an important piece of things. At the ITER site, several systems have already been commissioned, and for example, the cryogenic system is currently being commissioned. All of those things provide important information. But let's talk about moving forward, because many of the private companies have as public goals achieving a burning plasma earlier than will be achieved in the ITER experiment. So let's make the assumption that they will be successful on the schedule that they've laid out. What does that mean for ITER? And by the way, I would say that all of us who have been involved in fusion, for me, it's since graduate school, are cheering on the private companies. This is a great thing that's happening, and we want them to be successful. So let's assume that they're going to be successful. What does that mean for ITER? Well, what ITER will give you, it is a highly diagnosed machine that was designed to provide information to a broad variety of fusion concepts, a broad variety primarily of magnetic fusion concepts. And so the information from ITER, and especially when it comes to long pulse, because part of what you need to be able to handle is the particle and heat exhaust. That's an important piece. Understanding various modes of plasma behavior, that's what will get us from the next steps that you're seeing in the private industry to a commercial industry. And then finally, I would say, think of ITER in a similar vein as an advanced test reactor, as a high-flux isotope reactor in the United States. The fission industry still gets support from research reactors as they evolve and improve and provide more economical energy. So those are some of the examples.
Absolutely. Mr. Allen, what challenges or hurdles does the industry still have to overcome for the dream of fusion power plant to become a reality?
Well, you know, the thing is that fusion is hard. I don't want anybody to think that just because we say we can get there in a decade, that fusion is easy. Fusion is hard, fusion is hard. And when I mentioned in my testimony that there's 37 different approaches, 37 different ways within our member companies, the challenge is that each of them have a different pathway forward. So as the industry association, what I'd say that like Dr. Hsu said, it is about collective will. It's about resources. It's about applying resources. That means money, yes, but it also means human resources. It means capital. It means public interest. So things like this are just almost as important as getting over those scientific hurdles, because we need everybody to be pulling in the same direction on this.
Dr. Solomon, Dr. Hsu, following up on that, how are DOE user facilities like D3D supporting the expanding fusion industry and helping them overcome the hardships they're facing so successfully?
Oh, thank you. Well, good question, and I'm glad you brought it up. D3D has, as you may understand, is an open user facility. So first of all of the results which are generated on the D3D facility are openly published and are available to all. More recently, a variety of steps have been taken to actually open up D3D to be more accessible to private industry participants, including the ability to conduct proprietary-based research as well. So, and not to mention, of course, as I alluded to in my opening remarks, of course, is that D3D is a very flexible facility. It's a very well measured, instrumented, measured, diagnosed facility, which makes it very valuable for any private entity who encounters a particular challenge in their regime, even if it's a different fusion concept, to be able to come and test something in a fusion-relevant environment and maybe find a pathway forward.
Dr. Hsu?
Yeah, I'll add two things. One is the science that D3D produces is absolutely exquisite. It's the best in the world, and it develops our workforce, which is the second point. to be the leading innovators in fusion science.
Looks like my time's expired, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Bowman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Hsu, I was very pleased to see a budget request for fusion from the President that was largely consistent with bipartisan authorizations from this committee. This is the level of ambition we really needed from the administration, and you delivered. That said, I understand that the request still does not include any specific funds to establish an alternative fusion energy concepts program as authorized in statute since 2018. This is surprising because, as you know well, in recent years, several alternative concepts have begun to show promise for commercial fusion. Yet there is currently no ongoing DOE program to support research and assessment of these innovative concepts outside of the public-private partnerships funded by the Milestone Program. So, for example, researchers at the university or laboratory level do not currently have a program that would even consider their application for federal funding. It's exciting to see all the progress and enthusiasm from the private sector, but this is still a big concern. I do not believe that DOE should be relying almost exclusively on venture capital to help identify the next game-changing approach in this truly transformative field. So, Dr. Hsu, what, if any, steps is the department taking to address this critical gap?
Thank you for the question, Ranking Member Bowman. So first, let me just say, we hear you, and I will be taking this very topic back for discussion at the DOE. As some of you may know, this area of research was my own area of research before I came to Washington, and in fact, I testified before this committee on innovative approaches to fusion energy back in 2016. And so we recognize that past public investments in this area contributed to the vibrant fusion private sector that we see today. I will point out a few things, though. As you noted, the public-private partnerships do support alternative concepts. I would also mention that Infuse and the Milestone Program specifically have alternative concepts as eligible to participate in those programs. And attention on alternative concepts will grow because of this. I'll also say that the proposed R&D centers in the FY24 President's budget request are intended to be aligned with the Milestone Program, and thus alternative concepts will be eligible there as well. So all this being said, we continue to implement the program direction in the CHIPS and Science authorization language, balancing priorities and available funds. But we look forward to continued discussions with the committee on this important topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hsu. Dr. Kirtley and Mr. Holland, is there anything you'd like to add on the potential value of such a program to advancing our entire U.S. fusion enterprise?
Yeah, I'll start. I can start with how valuable the alternative energy programs in the past were for Helion. I would say that our company and our technology would not be here without them. Our earliest prototypes were supported by DOE Office of Science direct grants as well as SBIRs. Both of those programs enabled us to take very high-risk technologies that were theorized and on paper and not yet ready for deployment, had not yet demonstrated fusion, build those machines, prove fusion, get to KeV, 10 million degree temperatures, measure fusion reactions, and be able to, that was the stepping stone that enables us to go to private venture capital and then work with them and their internal review processes to be able to move forward with commercial funding. We would not be where we are without it, and so I'm definitely a supporter of this for new technologies.
And I would just add, in my my written testimony, I include a chart that's kind of a family tree of fusion. And like I said, there's 37 member companies of the FIA, and I don't think we've stopped growing. All of them have different technology subsets. So the idea of having just a government program that only looks to one or two of those approaches, I think it's important to have a full-fledged alternatives program as well. Given the nature of it shouldn't be a zero-sum game, needs to be as much funding as possible for everything.
And if I can add one more, after we went out to the private venture capital community and showed that we can do fusion in our systems and got some early stage funding, ARPA-E, the Alpha program, was also there to meet us as we were growing and take this early technology and scale up in both fusion output and physical scale and energy scale. And so at that point, we had a partnership with matching venture capital and public funds to go build machines that did fusion. And all of those paved the way to the large-scale fusion machines that we operate today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Bowman. I now recognize Mr. Fleischman for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to this distinguished panel. I've worked with you before. You've been at many of our meetings, and of course, Dr. McCarthy, for those in the audience, has been kind enough to actually tutor me in fusion. So I appreciate that so much, and I know you're extremely well versed in fission as well. So thank you for being here. I represent the Oak Ridge Reservation. In my other life, here I am an appropriator. I chair the Energy and Water Subcommittee of Appropriations, so we look forward to funding a lot of the initiatives and working in a bipartisan manner on fusion. So I thank you all. The recent technological advancements in the fusion energy sciences, particularly the National Ignition Facility breakthrough this past December at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory that we've mentioned earlier, has captivated many people around the country as we eagerly anticipate the potential for commercial fusion energy. As has been discussed, the Office of Science has helped lay the foundation for these advancements and has started to take the next step towards commercialization through its public-private partnerships program and through its work to advance fusion pilot concepts. My question is one of more of inquiry for the entire panel, and I'll begin hopefully with Dr. McCarthy. Why is the Office of Science leading this effort, not the Office of Nuclear Energy? Public-private partnerships and fusion pilot concepts seek to take fusion energy sciences beyond the bench scale and into the realm of commercialization. Is that an appropriate role for the Office of Science?
Thank you very much, Congressman Flashman. And I'll point out you are a very good student. He did a lot of homework before we actually met.
Thank you.
So I'm going to talk just for a minute and then pass it on to my colleagues. I think typically a reorganization isn't necessarily how you solve some things. I think what we need to do, especially in these phases, is look at what is making it challenging to do things quickly. And what do we need to do to remove those barriers? And I think that's an important first step. And so with that, I will pass it to my colleague.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Congressman. It is, you know, sometimes the question of which box goes where in the organizational chart is academic, but I think in this one it is really interesting and important to think about. Because if fusion gets to be as big as we all say it is, you know, building a fusion power plant today, bringing, you know, clean, safe, sustainable energy to the whole world, then it's obvious there needs to be an applied program. There needs to be a fusion energy applied program that stands on its own. The things that have to be done and researched in fusion are separate and independent on its own, whether it's from nuclear energy, electrical energy, all of the other applied offices in DOE. Fusion should stand on its own. Fusion should be able to have a leader within Department of Energy who can advocate on their own for fusion. So we think that ultimately that the question of going there is important. Whether it gets there next year, 5 years, 10 years, open question, and we look forward to working with you and the members of this committee on determining what that looks like. But ultimately, yes, there should be a fusion energy applied program.
Thank you.
Well, I was going to stay silent, but I don't think I'd get away with it. First, let me emphasize that the DOE must ensure the success of both the fundamental fusion and plasma sciences alongside our new focus on applied R&D efforts and public-private partnerships. So we need both of those for the bold decadal vision to ultimately be successful. And I want to amplify what Dr. McCarthy said. I think our immediate need is really to ensure that the priorities of the bold decadal vision, such as the milestone program and other areas outlined in my written testimony, are off to a strong start, and that we can move quickly, and have the agility to move quickly. So I'll just say DOE is considering the barriers, the factors, and the criteria that impact that success, and we look forward to continued discussions with the committee on this.
Want to again thank each and every one of you for coming up today and being with us and testifying. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'll yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize Ms. Ross for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman Williams, Ranking Member Bowman, for holding this hearing today, and thank you so much to the witnesses for joining us. For decades, scientists and engineers have tested the boundaries of experimental physics to duplicate a fusion reaction and harness it as an energy source. The potential benefits to society from fusion reactors are beyond calculation. I represent the Research Triangle area and NC State University, so many people interested in this area. The fuel is abundant, widely accessible, and the carbon footprint is negligible, and its associated nuclear waste and nonproliferation concerns are minimal, as you all know. Despite these incentives and despite recent landmark achievements in the field, fusion energy science remains one of the most challenging areas of experimental physics today. However, it's crucially important to putting the world on a path of reduced greenhouse gas emissions, and with the advantages of fusion, it makes it worth pursuing and pursuing robustly. My first question is for Dr. Hsu. You highlight in your testimony just a few weeks ago that DOE announced a set of 8 selectees for its new milestone-based public-private partnership program for fusion. It's exciting and encouraging to see such a range of companies and approaches to fusion supported by DOE now. Can you provide us with any insight on the number of high-quality applications to this program that DOE is currently unable to support due to limited funds, and the level of funding to support the current selectees, and whether that's sufficient to do what we need to do?
Yeah, so I'm afraid I'm a bit limited in what I can reveal, but what I will say is, in my written testimony, I noted that we made the conscious decision to select a higher number of worthy selections at lower levels of funding to each. So that would tell you that we were oversubscribed. I believe the Fusion Industry Association has some data on that, which may not be complete, but gives you an idea. And so certainly there are more worthy applicants that we had than we could possibly support.
Okay. This next question is to all the witnesses, with the 2 minutes I've got left. The clean energy transition to net zero global economy by 2050 represents one of the greatest challenges and opportunities for the U.S. and the world. From a climate change perspective, we know we have to achieve net zero emissions in order to avoid the most catastrophic consequences of climate change. The science demands it, and we've passed laws recently to help the U.S. stay on track. Yet this transition also serves as an important opportunity for the U.S. to win the race among our global competitors in a clean energy economy. And some discussion was had about that, not when, but whom. By some estimates, the transition will require almost $5 trillion per year to achieve net zero. We're seeing increased competition with China across a range of clean energy technologies, and my fear is that we could repeat mistakes of the past where the U.S. invests in technology only to watch China and other nations come to dominate the market. I know, Mr. Holland, you raised this. Could you speak to that first, and then anybody else who wants to pipe in with the time we have left?
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you for the question. I want to be clear on this, that the Chinese are making very significant and serious investments both in their public sector government-run fusion program and increasingly in private companies. Now, what makes for a private company in China is an open question, but they've announced very significant capital raises of something like $700 million for a recent one, that are moving quickly and getting ready to build things. So we expect to see the Chinese trying to take a larger leadership role. That said, the United States and our allies have some really important inherent advantages. The combination of the private sector, scientists willing to take risks, and a government fusion program that has been a world leader for a long time. If we make the investments, if we do the things to move at speed, there's no reason the United States can't win this, and then also can't have a manufacturing industry that's more like, it's not like a commodity manufacturing industry like a solar industry or something. It's more like a really complicated manufacturing industry like an aerospace industry. And the United States is really good at that. So this is something, fusion is something the U.S. can lead on and should be able to lead on.
I see my time's expired, but if anybody wants, well, it's up to the chairman.
Please, go ahead, Dr. Kirtley.
I can make a brief statement. We can follow up as a group as we wish. I would say two quick things. One, we know that in China on the R&D efforts, there is, for instance, Helion released results from our latest machine and then very quickly saw a copycat machine identical to some published results we had published a decade earlier show up in China. So we know that that is happening on the R&D side. And then I'll say as a private business, we see this on the manufacturing side too, throughout the world. We have interest coming to us all over the world in bringing manufacturing for our systems outside of the United States. And so this is something that's very high up on our list to make sure that America invests in the manufacturing of the future so that we can build fusion generators here in the United States.
Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, thank you for your insightful question. Now recognize Mr. Miller for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member, for today's hearing, and to the witnesses for joining us today. Thank you. Over the past few years, we have seen incredible interest in fusion technology, and according to the Fusion Industry Association, over $2 billion of private funding was injected into fusion technologies just last year. This private capital is pouring into fusion companies that are looking to build prototypes and commercialize their technologies in the coming decade. Dr. Kirtley, congratulations on your company's own success raising capital. Could you explain a little bit more about how you plan to spend these resources and how they will help your company meet its goal of bringing its fusion energy plant online in 2028?
Congressman, thank you very much for the question. So Helion has announced that we have previously raised a total of around $577 million in private capital to date. We have used these systems to complete the operations of our 6th generation machine, beginning now the construction. This should fund the completion of our 7th generation machine. We call this one Polaris. That'll be completed. Our goal is by January of next year, and then come online through 2024, demonstrating electricity extraction or production for the first time from fusion. And then begin to pave the way with these funds for this power plant. So this means the design efforts, the early siting, and then in parallel, to answer some of the questions previously, is to begin manufacturing. So we announced earlier this year that we are manufacturing capacitors, energy storage systems here in the United States, the first capacitor manufacturing line I'm aware of in probably decades, and immediately got interest from both overseas as well as our existing other private industries in fusion and national laboratories to buy capacitors from us. And so we're also doing parallel efforts in a number of other manufacturing areas and would call on this committee to talk about how we can begin broad scaling this mass manufacturing beyond just Helion's needs, but the fusion industry in total.
Thank you for that detailed answer. Much appreciated. To all the witnesses, and anyone can jump in if they'd like, could you please shed some light on why there is suddenly all this private capital pouring into fusion companies?
Maybe I can, because I've talked to all of them. It's a combination of supply and demand. And by supply, I mean the science is ready. All of the work that's been done in national science programs around the world for 50 years has come together with the fact also that you have all of these other enabling technologies. David mentioned, capacitors and power management. There's also high-temperature superconducting wires that allow the most powerful magnets to ever be built. Laser, optics, and all of the other enabling technologies there, as well as computer technologies. Artificial intelligence and high-speed computing have really allowed us to model what we can do there. So that's the supply side. And then the demand side is that it's a huge business opportunity, and there's a huge need to meet the climate and energy challenges. And so that's why the investment is coming in, because they see that, look, there's only so many pathways to getting to a full net zero economy. And fusion provides a new tool in that toolkit. And some of the estimates for the size of the business are huge. I think it was Bloomberg said the value of the fusion industry could be $44 trillion by the time we're fully there. So it's an exciting time.
And what do you think is really the best course of action to familiarize the American people with, so that they're comfortable with this type of technology? Because we hear this a lot, that sometimes the American people aren't ready, or they may have somewhat of a distorted view on nuclear fusion, when I agree with you, that is probably the most cleanest form of energy that we have known to man, and certainly the most powerful, that I believe powers already 1/3 of our electricity grid. It's just, getting it put out there even more so to inform people. So in terms of the messaging aspect of this, what do you think is the most palatable way to help the American electorate and the constituents that we have across the country be comfortable with this technology?
So fusion, just very quickly, fusion is it's unknown at this point. As opposed to nuclear fission, which has its own challenges. Fusion is a new energy source, so we'll have to make sure that people are aware of the opportunities here and show them why it matters to them. And it's just going out there, being open about it. We're trying to get it started and getting people to know about it. If David wants to add more.
Sorry, yes.
If I can just add a little bit. First of all, I think people misunderstand where the public is with respect to fission. It was true in the old days that there was a lot of negativity towards fission, but the polls have showed that people are actually far more accepting. They understand the important part that it plays in getting to a net zero economy. The same is true for fusion. And I think one of the things that we need to do is to not just talk amongst ourselves. And so one of the things I try and do is to get out and talk to groups that aren't traditional groups for fusion or for fission, just to help people understand. And I found a very welcome reception. I think generally speaking, people understand the need for clean technology, and they will be, and I've seen that they're supportive. I think that'll continue.
Okay, awesome. Sorry, Chairman, it's up to you at this point.
Please, Dr. Kirtley.
I can try to be brief again. I think for our perspective, community engagement and making sure that people know what's happening in fusion is critically important for adoption of this technology. And so for us, it's show hardware. That's our policy. And so it's as much as we can show the things we're building, talk about how they work, show people talking about how they work, and then try to honestly address some of the challenges that may be in the future as fusion scales to large scale, and make sure you're having that honest discussion.
Thank you all very much. This has been incredibly insightful, and I appreciate your time. Thank you, Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. I believe this is the last set of questions. I want to compliment the committee staff, because not only they put together a great panel, but they've seated you public, private, which is entirely appropriate for for this conversation. One of the reasons that I'm excited about fusion is that I've gone and had conversations with many of the private companies and delved as deeply into their technology as they were willing, and perhaps limited by my ability to understand. But what it relates to, in my mind, is that we see miracles happening all around us today, and we take them for granted. We have near ubiquitous and low-cost, instantaneous global communications. You ever think about that? That is absolutely astonishing. Started as a DARPA program, as I understand, and as a tool of the government, and yet grew through public-private partnership, and then entirely through the public. It's extraordinary. I'm also reminded that there was a certain individual who wanted to reduce the launch of putting things into orbit because he had an idea that he wanted to go to Mars, I guess. And we now live in a world where launch costs have been reduced by 2/3 because we can land a 20-story building coming in at Mach 7 in a space smaller than this room every time. That's extraordinary. There are things that we're seeing that, quite honestly, I can't believe. Another would be robotic surgery, although I'm not ready to try that myself. But I put that context into this because I really was a fusion skeptic 4 or 5 months ago. And I've followed the literature relatively closely for the last 15 years or so, and as well as for advanced nuclear. It's just an area of interest and perhaps a little bit of expertise. And when I started diving in, it occurred to me that there is a path forward, and much of what we've heard today is talking around that. But just in these last few minutes, can each of you tell me one thing, just one thing, that you're optimistic about, or a reason for why you're optimistic about fusion? And I know there's many, but if you don't mind just going down the line, Dr. McCarthy.
Thank you. I'd say the main reason I'm optimistic is we now have this strong industry presence. It's an important leg in the stool. And so in the United States, we've got this ecosystem that can get together and move this forward. National laboratories, industry, universities.
Thank you. Ecosystem. Dr. Kirtley.
I have a similar answer where it's around the diversity of different ideas that are coming forward for fusion. I obviously have a perspective from Helion, but as a human, I'm very excited about what I'm seeing of all of these different approaches from fusion, all of which are building machines to prove out their ideas and get commercial energy on the grid as soon as possible.
It sounds like a good time to fund some of these different approaches. Dr. Solomon, please.
Well, I would add to that that the fact that we've been exploring fusion for decades, and it's still the case that there are basic fundamental advances being made that lead to record production of fusion in magnetic fusion energy, inertial fusion energy, and creative new ideas deployed, given by our scientists all the time that really change the way that you can operate a device is just amazing.
It sounds like this has inspired people to really start thinking differently, like landing first-stage rockets.
Absolutely.
Mr. Holland.
Maybe I'll change from the why to be excited about what we're doing, but more towards what it means when we get there. Because fundamentally changing our relationship to energy from something you pull out of the ground or something you rely on the weather for to something that is manufactured. Fusion as a manufactured good means that energy is a manufactured good. So that means that no dictator can control access to energy. That means that energy is available for anyone, anywhere in the world. And that just fundamentally changes humankind's relationship to energy and allows us to do a lot of really cool things.
Interesting. Sort of a democratization of energy, end of scarcity.
Yeah.
Dr. Hsu.
I want to give two quick answers. One is more pragmatic, and the other one may be philosophical. So the pragmatic one is that not all of the science is under our belt, but a lot of it is. And so what we need now is more engineering development. And I think that's where excitement that we can speed things up if we have the level of investment needed. The philosophical one is about getting to the next stage of civilization. If many of you may or may not have heard of something called the Kardashev scale, not the Kardashian scale, but the Kardashev scale, where it's about the amount of energy a civilization can harness, and fusion will take us to that next stage.
I think I saw a TikTok video about that. Thank you. I am going to indulge myself just for another minute, Mr. Bowman. I hope that's okay. I'll ask your permission, sir. These milestone programs, Dr. Hsu, start with you, and anyone can please, how do they work? Why do they work? We've talked about it in the context of funding perhaps a fusion energy applied program or funding these alternative strategies. Milestone programs, how do they work and why do they work? If you don't mind being brief.
Yeah, so we took a lot of inspiration exactly from NASA COTS. I think the guiding principles are that we really want to invite strong industry participation. That was a big component. So they have to want to work with the government. And we all know that contracting things can be a bit of a burden and reporting burdens. So that was the main thing. The use of other transactions authorities and agreements can get around a lot of that. But in exchange, the private sector is taking on a lot more risk. And we're protecting the taxpayer because the government does not spend the money until they've delivered on a valuable milestone.
That's very insightful. Thank you. Anyone else? Milestone programs,
I
why
would
do they
just-
work? How
just-
do they work?
Just really, underline what Scott said there at the end, that the nature of a milestone program, and it was used for SpaceX and the other private space industries to work with NASA and to get those started up and going. The nature of it is that it takes what is inherently a high-risk, high-reward thing, fusion energy research, and puts all of the risk on the private sector. There's no risk to the taxpayer here because if the milestone is not hit, the money doesn't go out.
Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
If I can just add one thing, Chairman Williams, and that is the important part here, in my opinion, is that partnership between private industry and the national laboratories and universities, because the national laboratories have expertise and facilities that don't exist and can't be replicated outside of there. So bringing that practical aspect, that industry focus of getting to a certain point in a certain schedule, meeting that together with the science and engineering capabilities is a key part.
Very interesting. Dr. Kirtley?
And I just want to add one on the theory of this, which is, I think everybody here is in agreement that our goal is to get fusion energy out as electricity on the grid as soon as possible. So everything we can do to develop programs and policies that have that in mind of how do we get electricity on the grid as soon as possible is really valuable. So in this case, the first of the milestone program was designing engineering power plants. And that was the focus of that. And so that's a really excellent tool to take these early stage companies, develop a power plant, and have that to go towards the next stage of how are you going to actually get that on the grid.
Great. I've taken more than my time, but I was just stalling so that Mr. Sorensen could join us, sir. Please, I yield for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Williams and Ranking Member Bowman, for convening this hearing and for our witnesses to be with us. I'm a strong believer that talent comes from all corners of our nation. I'm proud to represent Northwestern and Central Illinois in Congress. And today I'd like to focus my questions on the workforce space. But first, as the first meteorologist in Congress in nearly 50 years, I've been connecting my folks back home with the science of climate for nearly 20 years. As a scientist, I have long said that we don't have a silver bullet to solve climate change. Instead, we have silver buckshot. And it's up to us to analyze this dartboard, if you will, to find the pieces that work today, analyze them, and then work toward those solutions. But from left to right, I'd like to know your percentage chance. Let's just go with the meteorologist, okay? What is the percentage chance that what we're talking about today is the silver bullet? And I'll begin with you, Dr. McCarthy.
I believe with the correct investment, it can be. I think our biggest challenge, I believe, will overcome the science. Can we produce competitive fusion energy? That is a key question. So investment in materials and fuel cycle is essential to realizing that.
I've never heard silver buckshot before. I think I love it. And that part of that can be fusion. Obviously, I believe everywhere the sun shines, we should be harnessing solar energy, and the wind blows, you should be harnessing that energy. But for everywhere else, we need reliable baseload power. And so I think that fusion can be that answer. In terms of percentage, we now have, to Mr. Holland's point, 37 shots on goal, 23 here in the United States. And I think that gives us very high confidence that we'll get there.
As others have said, I'm also extremely optimistic. Part of the reason for this, and maybe also brought up as well, is that we need fusion. Maybe we need everything to make sure that we can make this energy transition. Fusion is a critical part of that. And what I see is that the recognition of that fact has driven so much innovation and creative ideas. And despite the fact that there are science challenges, technology challenges, just look around and you see a great amount of optimism in our young early career scientists and the like, engineers who see they want to work on fusion, they can make a difference.
So yes, we're going to get there, 100%. Not 100% for all 37. Unfortunately, I can't speak for all of them, but 100% we're going to get there. The challenge is, especially in the United States is an extraordinarily competitive energy market, and ultimately we're providing electrons. And providing electrons means you have to get the cost way down. And so our companies are laser focused on that, and I think that's really important to have that commercial focus working with the scientists.
Yeah, I would just say, you know, the energy problem, both in the short term and the long term, are so important that we can't count on any silver bullet. Even a fusion in the very long term may be that silver bullet.
Our next generation is incredibly worried about the climate that we are going to give them, that they are going to inherit from us. Dr. Hsu, what investment should we be making? You know, the DOE announced $46 million for commercial fusion just a couple of weeks ago. What would be the rate of return instead of if that was $46 million or if it was $460 million?
Well, that's above my pay grade. And I would say we would do great things with the President's request, and we know what we would like to do next.
Let me switch back over to the workforce. Considering that private fusion companies are rapidly recruiting early and mid-career researchers, I think that there's a worry out there that the supply chain of good quality teachers, instructors, won't be met. What steps can be taken by Congress and the fusion industry leaders to ensure that the quality of education in plasma and fusion will be maintained at our educational institutions? Yes.
Congressman Sorensen, I think that's a really important question. And if you look, for example, at what the Office of Nuclear Energy did, they made a concerted effort. There was an investment in scholarships and fellowships, in funding for infrastructure to help the universities build those programs. And so I think between the excitement of what's going on and those sorts of investments, we can get there. And in talking with professors, what they tell me is they're already seeing that rush of young people wanting to study fusion.
I think this is a critical question for us. I mean, as Helion as a company, we spend a lot of work hiring, a lot of work developing new talent and early career technicians, engineers, and scientists that aren't even ready to be part of fusion yet, but soon will be. And if we have this vision that we're going to be building an American fusion manufacturing industry, this means massive amounts of jobs, of technicians and assemblers and electricians and electrical engineers and scientists and nuclear engineers. And so building this and making sure that we're at the forefront of this so that America doesn't get left behind is going to be really critical. And so just think about the scale of what this means to be able to build, in Helion's vision, a power plant today. And that's massive gigafactories and high-paid workers for it.
There are STEM students in my district and in all of our districts that are ready to make the discoveries for the next generation. Thank you for sharing your insight and your talent with us today. Anaiba.
I recognize Ms. Lee for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for your time and presentation of your expertise before the committee today. Pennsylvania has long been a state known, some would say maybe notoriously, for fossil energy production and supply. But as an elected environmental justice advocate from Western Pennsylvania, I signal what opportunities lay ahead for the future of energy in my district, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and our country. In recent years, the global community has become increasingly aware of the urgent need to address climate change and to transition to cleaner, more sustainable forms of energy. Fusion energy has presented an opportunity to change our entire energy landscape. So as members of Congress, and particularly this committee, it falls on us to create and implement solutions to abate the climate crisis that is threatening the future of humanity. As a member of this committee, I'm proud to be a part of these changes by supporting innovation through research and development that have the potential to revolutionize our energy supply and the future of our planet. I represent a district that for far too long has been plagued by poor air quality, leaving my constituents with myriad respiratory problems like asthma or emphysema or bronchitis, for instance. For a few days last week here in DC, we experienced air quality that reaches hazardous levels. This scary experience for some is an insight into the daily lives of my constituents in places like the Mon Valley, where I'm from, as well as other communities across the country. My constituency has for years ranked among the worst in cities and regions with the most polluted air. So as we're here today, fusion energy is not an end-all, be-all in addressing our climate-related health concerns, but scientific avenues like this create a window through which we can view an American future where toxic emissions poisoning our neighbors and loved ones are not normalized or accepted. Dr. McCarthy, what resources and infrastructure do our institutions of higher learning need to support R&D endeavor to make fusion energy a reality?
So there are some specific experimental capabilities that could be built, test stands for testing blanket concepts. I mentioned that while we've done quite a bit on the science piece, we need to do a bit more on materials and fuel cycle. And so there are some opportunities that are there. Also, opportunities for students to do internships at national laboratories with these private companies. That's all part of getting to where we need to get in terms of the workforce and creating opportunities.
Mm-hmm. How much international collaboration will be required, if necessary, to bolster our domestic fusion energy program? And Dr. McCarthy or Dr. Hsu? Either.
I'll just say very quickly that international collaboration has always been part of the fusion program, and when I was in graduate school, it's one of the reasons why I was attracted into it, because working with the best and the brightest from all over the world was just a very exciting thing, and that continues today. So the fusion program works with experiments all over the world. I had talked earlier, and in my testimony, I talk about the ITER project specifically, which is being built as an international team. That's going to continue, but where the U.S. really has the advantage, and this was touched a bit earlier, is our ability. We've got this private program. We have the national laboratories, which really are the crown jewels, I think, in the world, and universities and innovation. Americans are good at innovation. That's what's going to give us that competitive edge, but international is an important part.
Yeah, if I may, I'll just add international collaborations are very central to our strategy, especially in the acceleration of fusion commercialization. There are many examples in our international and interagency conversations. These are focused on, say, a few things: access or shared development of very high-cost test facilities, ensuring and securing long-term supply chains with our allies. These could include fuel supplies, such as the startup tritium and lithium-6. These are the input fuels for deuterium-tritium fusion. And also harmonization of regulatory frameworks, because we want to deploy fusion globally if we're going to realize its benefits. And also, as you mentioned, developing a diverse workforce to support a future global industry. So these are areas, we, certainly the DOE and even the country, may not be able to do these things on our own, and we're going to want partnerships with our allies.
Thank you. Well, I would like to shoot up another one. I'll be respectful of my time, and I'll yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. I want to thank the witnesses for your valuable testimony and for sacrificing and gifting us the value of your time, which I also know comes at a dear cost. And I also want to thank my fellow members for their questions and engaging in this dialogue. It's clear to me it's time to greatly redirect resources towards fusion, public and private, and doing it together. I hope that we can work together to make this happen. The record for this hearing will remain open for 10 days for additional comments and written questions from members. But for now, this hearing is adjourned. Thank you.